This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 475, entitled "The Masculist Terrifying of Young Women with Babylessness." Description. This flyer claims that a major masculist strategy to spread masculist ideas and to menfair the gender laws will be to terrify young women with babylessness by telling them that quality young men will continue to refuse to give women their sperm unless young women vote with men to menfair the gender laws. Now the flyer itself. The Masculist Terrifying of Young Women with Babylessness by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. At the time of writing, September 2021, many countries have now COVID vaccinated most of their populations. So soon things will open up, lockdowns will cease, and people will be able to have public meetings again. Universities will be holding public lectures and talks again, etc. So the masculists will be able to air their views in public. This flyer discusses what an optimum masculist strategy should be to convince the public that masculist ideas need to be taken very seriously, or there will be dire consequences to humanity. The principal strategy I have chosen for this is implicit in the very title of this flyer. Instead of saying such things to mixed audiences, that is men and women, that, quote, "Women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with women's decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism, etc." End quote. I prefer to use a direct threat to women that will force them to listen, since they, especially young women at university, are directly concerned, and men will listen too, since the threat to women concerns them greatly also. In a nutshell, the threat is that the masculists and the MGTOWs will force women to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, or these young women will be forced into babylessness by men continuing to boycott marriage and fatherhood. Increasingly, as masculists and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet, and more millions of young men wake up to the bitter realities of the fluffy feminist hypocrite genocider control of the divorce courts, young women are finding that the quality men they really want to mate with to obtain the superior DNA from superior men for their kids increasingly refuse to give them their sperm, thus forcing these young women into babylessness, thus panicking them as they realize that boyfriend after boyfriend refuses to father her children. Young women are increasingly noticing that it is the quality men with their superior intelligence who are the first to go MGTOW, to absorb masculist ideas, who utterly reject marriage and paternity because they refuse to face a one chance in 4 of being financially crucified and have his life ruined by the hated, that is by men, fluffy feminist hypocrite genocider controlled divorce courts. The fluffy feminists, in all their hypocrisy, open brackets, that is, pushing for equal rights with men in the parliaments, but rejecting equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living, by not bothering to get a career competent education, that is, not fipping up, in brackets, that is, not becoming a FIP, equals financially independent person, who studies a career competent major at high school and college, so that they are capable of being FIPs as adults, able to earn a good salary, so that they do not become fluffies. brackets, equals a masculinist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus expecting to manslave him for years, a major gender crime of women against men, close brackets, have made divorce so toxic for men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men, especially the quality young men, refuse to marry and have kids. As the Masculist and MGTOW message gets out, quote, "Hey guy, don't marry, don't have kids, don't be a fool, don't subject yourself to a 1 in 4 chance if you become a married father of having your kids ripped away from you, losing your house, paying half your wealth and stuff to your divorcing fluffy ex-wife, paying her for child support and often alimony for the rest of her life, with no moral nor legal obligations on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up." The hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts are so toxic for men that marriage and paternity are toxic for men. So millions of men now reject both and choose to live the MGTOW, that's MGTOW, men going their own way, lifestyle. That is, men who refuse to marry, reject paternity and spend their money on themselves. The smarter the man, the quicker he is to understand and take up the MGTOW and Masculist message, who understands that it is dumb and toxic for a man in the modern era to marry and have kids. Thus, these growing millions of men around the world who say "niet" to marriage and fatherhood are having an impact on young women who are now increasingly panicking as they realize ever more forcefully that they are truly, in capital letters, not going to have a baby. At least not with a quality man with whom they really want to mate. Women are solipsistic, that is, very self-centered, with narrow existential horizons, much less interested in the big picture than men are. So if Masculists are to persuade young women to act in Masculist interests, then Masculists need to persuade these women with arguments that strongly influence young women, that is, the terrifying threat of their babylessness. Women are also hypergamous, that is, they have the evolved instinct to want to mate with a man who is at least equal to her or preferably superior to her in status, wealth, height, prestige, looks, etc., so that she can obtain his superior DNA for her kids, which is obviously good for the species, so evolved. This combination of developments can be used to great effect by the Masculists, who are the political, angry, confrontational branch of the manosphere, that is, the men's lib movement. The Masculists are now telling young women that if they want to have babies again, then they will have to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, so that the divorce courts are no longer slaughterhouses for men. By making the gender laws menfair, then quality men, the type of men whom young women really want to mate with, will be more willing to be fathers again. Lots of men want to have kids, but refuse to, given the awful toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the hated, fluffy feminist, hypocrite genociders. In brackets. Masculists label such fluffy feminists, who behave as feminists in the parliaments, but as fluffies in the divorce courts, as genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that 2/3 of young men now refuse to have kids, thus crashing the birth rate, thus wiping out whole populations. But these MGTOWs are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts, so the root cause of the paternity boycott are the fluffy feminists. Masculists tell young women that the root cause of their babylessness are the fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts, which indirectly are driving them crazy, making them hysterical as they realize they are not going to obtain the sperm of quality men. So if they want to have a baby at all, they will have to settle with some trash male whom they can pick up at some pub, have a one-night stand with, lie to him about being on the pill, get pregnant, then have his kid. The downside with this approach for women is that if the father is a trash male, then she will have a trash kid, which goes deeply against her evolved hypergamous instinct. The idea of having a trash kid is as repulsive to her as being raped, since both may give her an inferior baby. So masculists have here a very powerful ideological weapon that they can use to persuade, to force young women to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws. This approach of the masculist strategists, masculist theorists, appeals directly to women's vital self-interest, since having babies is women's dominant raison d'être. Young women will really prick up their ears when they hear that the Masculists and MGTOWs have the power to cause their babylessness, since men have a monopoly over their sperm. A woman cannot get pregnant without the sperm of some man, preferably a quality man with superior quality sperm, to produce a superior quality baby, whose genes will be superior to its mother's. The Masculists then tell these young women that the root cause of their babylessness is the takeover of the divorce courts by the fluffy feminists, who have made them so toxic for men that men reject marriage and paternity in their millions, forcing millions of young women to become terrified that they are truly not going to have a baby. The Masculists then tell these young women that by voting with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, in brackets, for example, reforming the divorce courts, legislating the para, that's paternity rejection right, removing legal discriminations against men across the board, creating gender equality committees in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, that then address both gender political issues, feminist and masculist, equally, which is far from being the case today. Close brackets. They will be more likely to have babies, since men will be more willing to be fathers again. The aim of the Masculists is to generate a hatred in young women against the fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders who have taken over the divorce courts, who are the root cause of their babylessness and their misery. The Masculists will then be in a much stronger position to force the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws, since with young women voting with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, it's much more likely that these new laws will be passed, since the gender politicians will then be much more able to resist the female bloc vote that favours the current gender laws that are so favourable to women, especially in the divorce courts. No para, when women have the MARA, brackets, maternity rejection right, aka abortion right, close brackets, etc. With both sexes hating the monoconscious, in brackets, that is, having had only one's feminist consciousness raised, close brackets, fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders, then monoconscious feminism will die out more quickly, as millions of monoconscious feminists convert themselves into becoming bi-conscious feminists, equally aware of how women oppress men as vice versa, since they will have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. So will lose their traditional monoconscious feminazi bitchiness towards men, that is, their anger towards men for this, seeing gender oppression as a one-way street, that it is women who are the oppressed and it is men who are the oppressors, whereas in fact gender oppression is a two-way street, and in reality that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with women's decades-lasting major gender crimes against men, the worst being women's decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism by not bothering to fib up, women's paternity fraud, where in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father, thus forcing him to pay for a kid for decades that is not even his. Women's pill line, where the woman lies to her boyfriend/husband that she is taking the pill, but isn't, who wants to get pregnant, does so, then by law forces him to pay for a kid that he doesn't want, thus manslaving him for decades. As millions of women become bi-conscious, they will become less feminazi bitchy, since their feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women will be cancelled by a corresponding and oppositely directed masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Bi-conscious feminists are much more likely to have boyfriends, since men refuse to have relationships with misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitches. Such women are repulsive to men, so are forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at for being such misandrist shits. So in the coming year or so, Masculists can stand up in public talks and threaten young women with babylessness if they don't vote with men to menfair the gender laws. This threat is very real, so these young women will really listen and become strongly motivated to learn masculist ideas, since their future motherhood will depend on them becoming active, that is, voting female masculists. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women. An e-textbook of 470 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.